Welcome. In the last video, I talked about how primitives are used in code, but we didn't get to see them in action because I said we first have to discuss variables. So let's get started. What is a variable? A variable, think of a number or a value, one of these four, a value that has a name. So for example, let's suppose that I'm 20 years old, right? And I want to give this 20 years, a name. Well, what name would that be? I could say the name of that is my name. So my name is an indication of the year of what is my age, right? So I am giving a name to a particular value. I know you've probably heard of the word variable, perhaps in mathematics, when they tell you find x or, find y. And, typically we use x and y a lot in math. So in here, it's very similar. X and y represent a number. In here, the variable represent any kind of information. It can either be a number, it can either be a text, or it can be a Boolean. Any kind of value is represented by a variable. And we use the variable because it's much more convenient. Now, why is it more convenient? Well, you can definitely just use the number in your code, right? If I said that we're talking about age and that my age is 20, I could definitely just write 20. Why do I have to give it a name and then use its name, as we'll show in a little bit? But the reason for that is, well, what if you have other kinds of 20s? What if you also have $20 in your wallet and you want to talk about money and your age and you use 20? When you look at a particular 20, how do you know you're talking about age, or how do you know you're talking about the amount of dollars in your wallet? What ends up happening is that we give these names to these values in order to make sure that we understand how they are represented in our code. And also because these values can change, right? If I say my age is 20, well, in a year from now, it's going to be 21. And so all of these things are incorporated and their information in our code, and we use variables in order to represent the values. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's talk about variables. There are three things that are important to a variable. The first thing is a data type. And as you can imagine, what I mean by that is every variable has a data type, which means every variable represents some kind of information, some kind of value that is defined by one of these four primitives or these four data types. The next thing that it needs is a variable name. Every variable has to have a name, right? If I said my age represents the number 20, well, it has to have a name, right? I can't just say you need a name in order to represent that value. So in this case, we give it a name. So this could be anything you want. So I'm just going to give it a squiggly line because the name can be anything. It could be my age. It could be some age. It could be your age, an age. It doesn't matter what name you pick. It just has to be something that it's a name that is very representative of the information itself. And the last thing that it has to have is a value. It has to have a value that is of one of the data types. So for example, if I was to have my age, well, my age is what? It's an integer, right? So this will be an int, and I'm going to call it my age, and it's going to have a value of 20. And this is how I define some piece of information in my software, in my code that I write. I'm going to give it a data type, then I'm going to give it a name, and then I'm going to assign a value to that name, which I'm going to represent thanks to that name. And that's it. This is how we use information inside of our code, by using variables. Now, let's go and take a look at how we do this practically in C++. Okay, so I'm going to be using the same project that we used for the Hello World. I will repeat real quick. Our code has to be written inside of these two curly braces. So the only code that we have written is this line, which I have not explained how it works, right? I haven't say, how this works. All you have to know is that whatever I put inside of this parentheses, whatever I put inside this parenthesis and that parenthesis, that gets shown in this black box that we call a terminal, right? So if I run this, which says hello world, it will say hello world right here, right? And that's it. So whatever I put here, that's what comes out there. So now, how do we use variables? So I'm going to put some space here in between in order so that we can write. And I said that we needed 3 things. We need the data type, we need the variable name, and a value for it. So we have 4 data types. Let me write them here. We have an int, we have a, well, let me start over with the right order. We have a bool, we have a char, an int, and a float, right? These are our 4 types of data that I've told you about, which represent the 3 different primitives: states, text, and numbers. Now, in order to use either of these 4, like I said, we need to use them with a variable. So let me delete them, and I'm going to start with numbers, and particularly whole numbers. So that means an int, right? And I gave you the example of trying to represent an age, and I said that I could call my age by giving it a name, such as the name my name. So I can literally do that, my name, right? Now, I want you to pay attention to one thing. I did not use a space, because this is 2 words, right? This is my space name. Variables, the name of a variable, cannot have a space in between. Everything has to be together, because C++ comprehends that spaces is to separate different concepts. And I'm using the same, these 2 words to try and represent the name, and by putting a space between them, C++ thinks that my is the variable name, and you're trying to do something else with this. So therefore, variable names cannot have a space. So this, in a way, would be int my name, right? And then it has to have a value. Well, let's say I use the example of the age number 20. So it will be something like this. Now, remember, I said 2 things last time. Well, last time I said that every statement that we write has to end with a semicolon, right? So I have to put a semicolon. And in the previous videos, I also talked about errors, and I said that this squiggly line means that there's an error. So there's something wrong here. And I did this on purpose. So in order to, we have the 3 pieces that we need to create a variable and use information as part of our program. However, we need to write it in a way that C++ understands. And I'm missing one piece here, and that is that this variable, whose name is my name, which represents a data of type int, I want to assign that variable the value 20. So in order to assign that value, I have to put an equal sign. And that's it. Somewhere, if I run this, notice that when I run it, nothing happens, right? I still get hello world and whatever. But what's interesting is that inside of your computer, in your memory, right now in this instant, there's a little piece somewhere that it has saved this my name inside of that memory, and it contains the value 20, and the program understands that it's a whole number, all right? I know that you're like, well, I can't do much with that, but, think about it. It's quite interesting. In all that electricity going through the computer, there is a little spot somewhere that has this 20, that the computer says, hey, this 20 is called my name, and it's a whole number, all right? It's powerful. I know that you're like, wow, that's amazing, because it is, right? Now, of course, that doesn't help us. We can't do much. So, but why don't we try and show what's in that variable? So instead of saying, show me hello world, I want to show what I put here. All right. So what I want to do is, again, this you will not understand why we're doing it. What you have to learn from today is how we do variables, which is by doing this: a data type, variable name, and we assign a value by using the equal sign, and that value has to be of the type that we're doing. So we're using integer, so it's a whole number. That's why we do 20, right? So in here, I can come, and instead of putting hello world, I can just put my name. And what this is saying is that there is an error. Now, you're like, wait, what? Why is there an error? Okay, so I'm going to tell you another thing that you're still not supposed to understand, and it's okay, I will explain this as we get there and we understand more concepts, but I want you guys to be able to see what we're doing inside of here, so that you can comprehend and see that you're actually learning something. Otherwise, you might feel like, I don't see that what I'm learning actually works. So whatever I do here in this line, just know that in time, in the incoming videos, I will explain what's going on. So right now, notice there's an error, right? But when I went back to hello world, there was no error. And that's because this thing, this printf, and what goes inside of this parentheses, it wants it to be inside of these two quotation marks. So it wants something that is inside quotation marks. You're like, well, wait, why? Well, again, I'll explain in the future. So you might be tempted to do this, right? But if I do this, well, what is that going to happen? Well, we're just going to see my name. Someone is racing in the street. Anyway, someone is just gonna say my name, right? But we want this to show the number. Now, what I want to do, and I just want you to believe me, is that I'm going to say, well, my name is, and I'm going to put a percentage and a D, and then after this little marks, I will put a comma, and I will actually now put the variable my name. Okay. And basically, what this is doing, this little magic that we have written here, what it's doing is says, okay, I want you to write my name is, right, %D, but what this thing is going to do before it shows it to the screen is going to say, okay, %D means % decimal, right? So I want you to put a decimal here. Where am I going to get the decimal from here? Again, you're not supposed to understand this. Don't worry about it. Just believe me, embrace it. We'll explain this as we get there. What you need to know is variables, which we did here. I just want you to see that there is indeed a 20 in my name. So let's run it, and now we'll see my name is 20. Okay? And if I change this to, let's say, 45, let's say I got very old all of a sudden. Well, not very old. 45 is pretty young. Don't get mad at me. I didn't mean it like that. So it says my name is 45, right? So whatever number I put here, and you can play with it. You can put, 1,000, 1,005, and you run it. Then you will also get my name. My name is 1,000. Why did I say my name? Why am I saying my name? You guys let me make this mistake since the beginning. We said we were gonna call it my age. I can't believe you fellas let me astray like that. I'm sorry. So there is my age, right? I just changed it, right? Notice I can just change it. I can run it, and my age is 1,005. So you're welcome to change. You can say the amount of money I have and make up money here. It's okay. All right. So again, ignore this for now. Let's focus on variables. So the other variables that I want you to look at, we said we also had the Boolean, right? So for a bool is going to be BOOL, and I can say, is it hot? And is it hot? I can't spell it today. Is it hot? And that can either be true, right? So basically I'm saying that it is indeed hot, or I can say false. Actually, no, it's cold, right? So this is how I can represent a Boolean. And then I also said characters, right? So char, and I can say first letter of my name. Notice how long this variable is. I can make them as, very, very long if I want to. But they're descriptive, right? You know what I'm talking about. First letter of my name. And my name is Daniel, so the first letter of my name is a D. Now, the way that you write characters is you use single quotation marks, and you put inside of that single quotation mark the letter. So D, right? So what this says is, what this is going to say is, the first letter of my name is the character D. And remember, we can only do one character. If I was to do da, even though it's not yelling at me, this is not proper. So we're just going to do one character at a time. Later, I'm going to show you how we save information like we do here. But for now, let's focus on the primitives, and let's focus on the data types. And the last thing is I can say float my money, and let's say I have $1.50, right? So here are 4 variables, and you can create as many variables as you want. You can keep writing here. You have, if you have as much space as there is RAM in your computer to store as much information as you want. So in your time, practice just messing with this. for now, I could actually put my money here, and I think this would work. So let's try it. My age is my money, and it actually did not like it, and there is a reason. I think this has to be an F for a float. And now see my age is right. So again, don't worry about this. I just wanted you to see that we can show that we are indeed putting this information inside of these things, right? But let's go back to, so F is actually for float, as you see here, and D is for a decimal number, so it's just, my age. All right. Now, one last thing before we wrap up this video, and that is the names, the variable names. So notice I told you that I couldn't put space. I couldn't say first letter of my name, right? Huge error right here. So we can't do that. So what we can, so you might say, well, are there any other restrictions? In fact, there is. So you can only use every letter of the alphabet, so A to Z. You can use numbers, and you can use underscore. So for instance, I can say int sum age over 10, right? So that's okay, 11, right? That makes sense. Sum age over 10 is 11, right? There's a number, that's okay. And I can also put an underscore. Sum age over underscore 10, right? So the rule is you can only have A to Z, numbers, and an underscore. The other rule is you cannot start with a number. So I couldn't do int 10 sum age 11. See, that doesn't work. And in fact, if you overheard, it says there's something wrong here. You cannot start a variable name with a 10, with a number. However, you can start it with an underscore. So rule number 1, you can use A to Z, numbers, and underscores. You cannot start a variable name with a number. Only characters, letters of the alphabet, and the underscore. And the last thing, which I started doing because I'm so used to doing this, just out of habit, is that there is a convention that we typically use. And different programming languages and different, programmers have different naming conventions. Notice that when I first wrote our first variable, I just wrote my age. But if you notice in all the variables, just instinctively, I started writing the first letter of every word with an alphabetized, except the first one, right? Here's L, O, M, N. I did that for all of them. This type of naming your variables is called camel casing because it represents like the capital letters look like the hoops of, the back of the camel. So this is a very standard of naming your variables. When you have lots of words to name something, you capitalize the first letter of every word except the first letter, the first word. And so this is this is a standard that I use for the most part. Other people like to do things like, for example, let's follow the syntax and call this my age so that we get rid of this error. So other people might do things like first number of something, and then 11, right? So some people like to separate each one, but then this makes the variable name a little bit longer since you have a underscore, and instead you could just capitalize this, so you save one character, makes it smaller. So just know that for the rest of the videos, I will always be labeling and naming every variable by using this naming convention called camel casing. All right, this is it. Again, we learn how to define, how to create information as part of our program, and how do we assign values. So again, there are 3 things that we need. We need the data type, which is one of the primitives, which is either bool, character, integer as a whole number, and float as a number with a fractional part. It has a variable name, which has some rules. It can either be letters of the alphabet, numbers, and underscore, and you cannot start with a number. And typically we use camel casing in order to name them. And it has to have a value that we assign to that variable. And to do that, we put an equal sign. And that value has to be of the type of the data type. So notice, false is of type bool, right? The characters is of a character. a whole number. This doesn't have a fraction part. That's an integer. And this does have a fractional part because here we have the period. That's a float. And this is how we create variables as part of our program. In the next few videos, we're going to be talk about how we use this information, right? Because, I mean, it's great that we have information, but we would like to manipulate it. We would like to do things with it, create other information, and then use that other information to do other things, and so on. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about that in the incoming videos. I hope you found this video useful. I know it was a little longer than usual, but if you found it useful and you don't mind, leave a like. If you're new to this video series in the channel, check it out. Subscribe if you like what you see. Be safe and peace out.